Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, home of all things stock, investment, and personal finance related. Now for today's video, we've got a really special one for you. We're going to be joined by Natalie Brunell, who's one of the top personalities in the crypto or Bitcoin mining space. She's got over 60,000 followers on her YouTube channel and over 300,000 on Twitter. We've got a lot to talk about today, but before we get into it, please take a second, hit the like button, you guys. It's a big help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join. And let me know in the comment section below if you've heard from Natalie previously, maybe on her podcast, and what you think about her thoughts in relation to the Bitcoin space. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's visitor, we've got Natalie Brunell. She's a real influencer in the Bitcoin space and community. She's a host of Coin Stories podcast and the anchor of the Hard Money Show. Natalie, thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great, so we'll get right into it. For people who are maybe unfamiliar with your podcast or some of your work, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got involved in the Bitcoin space?
Sure. So I have been investing in Bitcoin since 2017. But when I first started, I was like so many of my, viewers and listeners or target audience. I had no idea what this was or why I should listen to it. I started out very skeptical. I thought, oh, if it's digital, then it could definitely be hacked or it could be compromised in some way. I obviously saw the volatility and that made me worry too. But a mentor of mine gave me the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and that changed my life. That changed my trajectory because all of a sudden I realized that what I thought I knew about money was completely wrong, and really that I hadn't learned about or understood the financial system. And shame on our public schools, because even the best ones, and I worked really hard as a student, they don't teach you about money printing or how the banking system works. And that's knowledge that really empowers people to make the right decisions so that they can take care of themselves in the future. And so I just went further down the rabbit hole. I consumed every single book, every podcast, every YouTube video, and I started to get to know the big names in the space. And again, my mentor came back to me because we would always talk about these subjects. And he said, why don't you interview these people? I had a podcast that I was doing as a hobby. I was a network news correspondent, but then on the side, I was actually a hobby podcaster, a hobbyist. And I was podcasting people within my industry or in media about their career paths and how they achieved success and how they overcame various obstacles. And so he told me, why aren't you interviewing the Bitcoiners about Bitcoin? And so I thought, maybe I'll do that. I'm very curious how these people ended up finding Bitcoin, what they did before, what gave them such strong conviction that this will be our future savings technology and money. And so I started to reach out. I had almost no followers. I was just a, reporter based in LA. And the great thing was this community is very welcoming, and obviously they want to educate the public. So a lot of people responded to me. They said they would gladly come on the show. And I slowly started to create this Coin Stories, which I thought was just going to, again, be a passion project. And now it's my full-time career in addition to education. So I'm super grateful because I get to talk to all of these big voices, both in Bitcoin, but also in economics and business and politics, about what's going on in the world and how Bitcoin can address some of the very biggest problems that are impacting the average person.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like your mentor's a smart guy. I read the Bitcoin Standard as well. I've been following the podcast. Really interesting. And I was going to say that exact thing. It's not specifically just about Bitcoin or crypto. It really relates the whole political, economical, geopolitical kind of climate into the crypto discussion, which I think is really cool. And just to toot your horn for you for a second there, you've got now over 300,000 followers on Twitter, you guys. So Natalie definitely has met and rubbed shoulders with some of the biggest and best influencers in this space. Now, Natalie, what was it about Bitcoin, or you call it, I guess, the orange pill moment, that caught your attention and really got you so fixated on this product?
Well, thank you, first of all, for your kind words. I think it was just learning about how money works and the fact that even though I had never really thought about inflation prior to the pandemic, really, and people talking about CPI and inflation going up, I did not think of it in the way that I was supposed to, which is just very simply, inflation is the expansion of the money supply. And the more money there is, the less each unit is worth. And so we have this track record of just destroying the purchasing power of the dollar. And one thing I also didn't learn until Bitcoin is that as the global reserve currency, the fact that the US dollar is used all over the world to settle transactions, we've had immense privilege, and we've been able to inflate and go so far into debt in a way that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have these agreements in place that were created several decades ago to ensure that the dollar is the money of the world. And it's really hurt people that are good and that just want to work hard and provide value. It's broken the incentive system. It's created a system in which, you know, the very few, the people closest to the money printer and the politicians are at the biggest advantage at the expense of everyone else, and they get to socialize the losses and privatize gains. And we're seeing growing wealth concentration and a growing frustration, right? Because it's like you could work harder and harder, but if your money's worth less and less, you feel like you can't catch up. And so I think that's why we're seeing an increase in populism. And I saw that firsthand as a reporter, because I would go out into these communities across the country and everybody was facing the same issues. They would feel like, why can't I afford my child's education? Why are my wages not keeping up with the cost of living? And you have to really dig in to understand why that's happening. And so through the Bitcoin learning journey, I finally understood that our money was just broken. And when you start to examine what are possible solutions, you know, some people come to the conclusion of gold because you can't easily inflate the supply, and it is a hard money that's been trusted for thousands of years. But gold has its drawbacks and its challenges, and much of it has been centralized, and it's very difficult to audit, and it's controlled by a lot of central banks. And so you take the next step, and we live in a digital world, and we need a digitally native currency, and one that can't be inflated or manipulated. And so you realize that actually, as you dig in further and steelman, you know, all the arguments, Bitcoin is that solution. Bitcoin is the fix to the money. And I'm just really proud to be working in this space, because I think so many people are hurting and they don't know. They're putting the blame into things that really are superficial. It's not the color of the politicians. It's not left and right. It's really deeper than that. It's our financial system, and now we have a way to fix it and make it better, and actually have a level playing field in terms of competing and providing value. So yeah, that's kind of why I believe in Bitcoin, I guess.
No, great answer. And you're right. In the Bitcoin standard, they do compare and contrast it to gold, and gold has been a stable currency for eons. But like you said, it's hard to store, it's hard to count, it's hard to divide into smaller portions, it's hard to move. So I definitely think there's an appetite there. Now, on your recent podcast, I think maybe 2 or 3 ago, you talked about some of the spot Bitcoin ETFs and the excitement in the community about that. What does that really mean for the Bitcoin community?
You know, obviously the Bitcoin community, I can understand why there are some mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, you really want the institutions to come in, or some people do, because that will spur greater adoption and make the on-ramps more approachable to the average investor. On the other side, people are skeptical, and rightfully so, of massive corporations that are very close to the money printer and the politicians, and sort of this power structure that has hurt so many people, especially in the working class. So I've seen mixed reactions to it online, but overall, for me, I want more and more people to adopt Bitcoin in the safest and most approachable way possible. A lot of people, you know, in the mainstream world, they trust these legacy institutions for better or worse. And if they embrace something like Bitcoin, it legitimizes it. And hopefully, you know, in the future, even if they start with the ETF, they do take the time to learn about it as an asset that you can custody, that has no issuer, and you can actually take self-custody and be your own bank. So I hope it is like that next step to getting more people to take this industry seriously and to educate themselves on it. I definitely think that people should actually own Bitcoin the asset and take self-custody. But I know that for a lot of people, they will be able to now add it to, their accounts once these spot Bitcoin ETFs get passed, which I believe they will be, not right away, but in the future. And I just think the more that people embrace this, the better for everyone.
I would agree. And yeah, it looks like today there was a little bit of a hiccup with some of the ETF stuff and they've gone back, but I would agree that they will get pushed through at some point here. Now, it was a couple weeks ago, but you went to the Miami Bitcoin conference. I understand you sat down with Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy. Can you tell us a little bit about that interaction? Because he's definitely one of the biggest names in the space. And I'd be curious to hear kind of how that discussion went.
Yeah, so Michael is someone who I really admire, the way that he pushes the education forward, and he makes it, he speaks about it in a way that the average person can understand, and he's very thoughtful, and in his own words, he's very cheerful and constructive. You don't ever see Michael attacking anyone. He doesn't pick sides. He isn't, controversial. He really just focuses on the financial empowerment aspect of Bitcoin and the fact that it allows 8 billion people around the world to finally have property rights and a way to save into the future. And so I've loved listening to him, and it's been an honor to get to sit down with him. I've had him on my show a couple of times, most recently in Orlando, Florida, where we spoke at the MicroStrategy conference. I got to learn a lot more about what his software intelligence company is doing, and MicroStrategy has really served as sort of a spot Bitcoin ETF in the interim when there's no official one, and it has outperformed everything: bonds, other equities, gold. So obviously the Bitcoin strategy was a winning one for Michael and his team. And also they're launching products to help spread Lightning adoption, which has been really exciting. So things like, you can incorporate Lightning as a form of payment and rewards and incentives within your own company is something that his MicroStrategy is taking on, which I think other companies will adopt as well. And I just think it's really, really exciting to see the developments in the space. And at MicroStrategy, a lot of companies were there that were from outside the Bitcoin space. They were from, massive corporations, the Boeings and big companies that are name brands that we know of, and the FBI that need software solutions, and now they're starting to learn about Bitcoin too, which is really, really exciting. So I have big hopes for big institutions coming in and adopting Bitcoin in a way that makes it really, really easy and approachable, so that we can all be earning Lightning at whatever job you have.
There you go. I do too, and that's why I'm so excited about the ETF. And for years, it's felt like we've kind of been in this perfect storm. And I think now with the general excitement with tech and AI and the upcoming election and the halving event next year, I feel like there's so many macro catalysts for Bitcoin, and it's really going to be a great time to be in the space. So that was going to actually be my next question, Natalie. We've got the halving event coming up next year. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the block reward gets cut in half. Or the reward for mining Bitcoin. What do you think that means to the industry, and how are you kind of gearing up for this halving event?
Sure. So obviously this has always coincided at least around 6 months after the halving with a massive move in the price upward. It's a supply shock, like you said. So less Bitcoin will be entering into circulation with each block. And that's always really exciting, because that's the power of a disinflationary monetary technology. But I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly one of the people that's really interested in if we're going to follow the same pattern that we have of these 4-year cycles, or if maybe we've broken into something different, because the macro conditions we are in right now are unprecedented. We printed more money in about a year and a half than we had for the prior 100 years. And I try to stay on top of all of the macro discussions that are happening, and when people are anticipating a recession, whether it's going to happen, how big it's going to be. I'm definitely in the camp that believes not only is there going to be a recession, a hard landing, but it could potentially be very severe. Because we have so much debt now and so many malinvestments that were made with this easy free money, and we just haven't seen the tide fully come out. Why haven't we seen it yet? Well, we've literally pumped more money into the system than we ever have before, and so that money is going to be sloshing around for a bit. There's still so much liquidity, and so before we see the indicators, the lagging indicators sort of catch up, I think we still might have a little bit of wiggle room. And all of this, again, is going to coincide with this halving, with a very predictable schedule that's set in stone forever with Bitcoin, that is immovable and unshakable no matter what happens with the world around us. So I think it'll be interesting to see how these macro conditions and headwinds come into play with Bitcoin's schedule. And I do think that people are taking the asset class more seriously with, the institutions we discussed earlier, but also just this idea that look how much money they printed and look how far we are in debt. And what is the fix? What is the possible solution? Where should you put your money in order to be safe? We've got a huge issue with commercial real estate. Equities have become obviously more volatile ever since they raised rates. And I think people are recognizing the fact that this is a truly scarce asset that's harnessing the power of technology and digital monetary technology, which I think the whole world will soon be using. So I think Bitcoin's going to shine. I just think it's going to be choppy for the next couple of months or year leading into the halving. But, I'm in this space because I do believe that it will be adopted as a main, if not medium of exchange, at least the most powerful store of value.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, and not only all the printing and stuff that happened during the pandemic and post-pandemic, but also the fact that you've got groups like BRIC now, which are decoupling from the US dollar as that reserve currency, which you alluded to. And yeah, there's definitely things going on that I don't remember seeing before in history. Your previous guest on the podcast said they feel like the US economy and stuff is ripe for an upturn. It's just really a question of when, and your points around the halving kind of coinciding with that, I think is pretty spot on. So with that being said, Natalie, you've been in the industry for quite some time now. What do you think it really is that the general public maybe isn't getting or doesn't fully comprehend about Bitcoin?
There are so many misconceptions. There's so much FUD out there, and people were able to capitalize on the FUD when the crypto exchanges like FTX went down and a lot of the scamming was revealed. But I do think that one of the biggest is the misconception that you need to be able to purchase a whole Bitcoin. I think that one of the most important properties of Bitcoin is that it's infinitely divisible. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm about to release a podcast episode next week with Saifedean Ammous, who, again, wrote the Bitcoin Standard, changed my life. He just recently came out with a new book. You can actually see it on my shelf, Principles of Economics. And he goes into the fundamentals of how to run a functioning economy in a way that empowers people to prosper and to add value and be able to save for their future. And one of the things we discuss is whether there needs to be an expanding supply of money. That's what we currently have. And the Keynesian, the accepted, central government view is that you need an elastic, adjustable form of money. And Saifedean and I discussed the fact that the Austrian School of Economics and a lot of Bitcoiners believe actually the very opposite is what we need. We need a fixed money supply that's infinitely divisible. And that's what will make for an economy that can operate on supply and demand and real interest rates, so that everyone knows exactly what they're getting when it comes to services and products, and so that they can put away that money and have it earn in the future or be used as capital for investment, so that other entrepreneurs can take risk and try to make new innovations happen. And we don't have a system like that. Again, we have that money printer. We go further and further into debt. Everything's based on credit, and very few people get access to it first, and it doesn't trickle down. And so it's like a whole different line of thinking. And so I just hope that people come to understand that the power of Bitcoin, not only is it's decentralization, just like the internet's decentralized, but it's that supply cap. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, and 21 million is enough. And that 21 million is infinitely divisible. And someday we might all be transacting in Satoshis.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that was the first thing years ago when I said to my parents too, and they're like, well, what happens if something costs more than 21 million? And I was like, well, you're not quite grasping it yet. But no, that's great. And I'm looking forward to that interview. Like I said, you've definitely talked with some of the biggest names in the space. You mentioned self-custody a little bit earlier as well, Natalie, and I know that was a recent topic on Coin Stories. And you were saying you're putting out some sort of a tutorial for cold storage and using those wallets. Has that come out yet, or is that still on the roadmap?
No, that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm partnering with BTC Sessions for that. And this is one of the things that I think is the biggest hurdle to mass adoption for people who know and understand Bitcoin. I think that extra step of taking self-custody can feel a little bit intimidating, and it certainly did for me as well. But it is so important, and honestly, it's a lot easier than people think. So I want to make it approachable, and for me, I've tried to take the time to learn about all the different self-custody solutions, the different hardware wallets, and I've realized that there's a reason why so many Bitcoiners in the space, the hardcore, very technical ones that have engineering backgrounds and computer science and really are the OGs that have been in the space the longest, pretty much all of them recommended to me Cold Card. And so I'm going to be making that switch, being very transparent about it. And so I want to learn how to do it in a way that it can be explained to anyone that, again, doesn't have a technical background. So, people can come on the journey with me because that's what I plan to use in the future.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be on that journey. I'm looking forward to that one, as many of my viewers are as well. So Natalie, thanks so much for being with us here today. I really appreciate your time. You guys, if you're still watching the video at this point, make sure you hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, McNallie Money, feel free to join. I know we cover a lot of the Bitcoin mining stocks, but there's definitely a lot more to this industry than just the publicly traded companies. And Natalie, I think you do a great job of really bringing those two worlds together. So I wanted to thank you again for your time today, and looking forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, great. And if people want more information, what's the best way to get a hold of you or to find out about your podcast and the rest of it?
Sure. So I'm very active on Twitter at Nat Brunell. I have my podcast Coin Stories on every podcasting platform as well as on YouTube. I also do Hard Money. We share those videos on Twitter as well as YouTube. And people can also send me a note at Natalie@talkingbitcoin.com.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, guys, thanks so much for your time today.